Hello, everyone. Today we have hopefully an interesting conversation about the release train engineer role, profile, and things around that. Yeah. So we have a professional, and she's in this particular profile for a while. Before we talk specifically about release train engineer, let's know a little bit about her current profile as well as a work history, and then I may ask some interesting question related to release train engineer role before we take the conversation forward. She may ask a question afterwards, but I will start asking myself. Give us a little brief about you, and then we probably talk about a role further.
Sure. Thank you, Saket sir, for having me here. And I have total around 21 years of experience in IT, and around 20 years of it is in US itself because I moved early here. I started as a Java developer, moved to Java technology lead, tech lead, then project manager, Scrum master, product owner, and finally right now as a release train engineer. That has been my journey. And I am with a service-based organization, so more in client vendor model.
Okay, interesting. So in a client vendor say setup, you have been performing various roles.
Yes.
Scrum master, product owner, release train engineer, and definitely initially started with a development role. So you have seen various Scrum safe roles, but in a client vendor setup.
Yes, in a client vendor setup.
That makes it a little interesting because usually the safe setup is seen as a bank implementing safe, and the people are working inside the bank or something like that. But yes, there are situations where there are service providers who are working with the client in their safe implementation. So tell me something about your role as a release train engineer, especially in the setup of this client and vendor.
Sure. So as I shared, right, like being in a service-based organization, I might do many things that are more the need of the hour and less the specific RTE role. But I'll share what all work that covers most of my day. So one of the primary role as RTE is driving the PI plan, meeting and planning for PI and ensuring that the following outcomes, like some of the outcomes that are achieved, like as an outcome of the PI, the roadmap. Currently, we have 12 teams under me. So finalize the roadmap for the 12 teams for the next quarter, and also help identify the overlaps and interdependencies, because that is like the key outcome that we see. That is the help identify the overlaps and interdependencies between various teams, and to plan the delivery accordingly. Also help teams identify the various risks that they foresee in their delivery and the mitigation plan as well as the contingency planning. So as an outcome, last phase of that PI, we go through what are the risks that each team that sees, and what are the mitigation plan, and even if the risk still happens, what is the contingency plan in place. And after those 2 days, as an outcome of those 2 days of PI planning that we have, we follow I work with various teams and then publish we have a weekly release train model. Now, weekly release train model doesn't mean that all 12 teams end up in each week. It just means that we have these trains running every week. And based on how the planning happens, how the interdependencies and risks are addressed, they join the train that that will work out. But the forecast has been published after the 2 days of the PI planning meeting. So have the release train schedule listing, which will list all the features and sub features that will go in each release. And since it is incremental and iterative delivery, their exact status, like in each release, that is also published. For example, we have a feature that might run incrementally and iterative for 4 weeks. So each week when that is going in, is it dark, that is staying behind gatekeeper? It goes in prod but stays behind gatekeeper, or is it light being accessed by the customer? So publish that also in the forecast. So those are some of the key things, as well as the confidence level and all, right? Confidence, architectural planning, but these are key outcomes that I have from our PI planning meeting. Then work with our Scrum Masters and product owners in a daily stand-up call. Now, the Scrum Masters and PI, all these teams, they have their own daily ceremonies and all, but we have a daily stand-up because this is a large implementation that is happening. And but only here we don't go with what happened yesterday, what happened this, but this is primarily focusing on the impediment updates. So we have a impediment registers where we look at the impediment aging tracker and all. But for each team, what got added, what removed, what are some of the key roadblocks, blocks, which are kind of non-negotiable that got introduced. A quick update, but we run through all the impediments, and that is a daily call that we have. Then we also have, like, as a release RTE, like conduct weekly meeting with the product owners and senior management, where this is more a collaborative activity where each team once a week walks through their weekly updates, key impediments, current sprint status, and velocity. And also participate in other things that consume my time is participate in weekly executive briefings and share the team status. And as we have weekly releases going, so a lot of documentation and planning goes in for every releases to ensure that, and though the model that is expiring is, the team is self-sufficient, self-serving, but when you have a team of a bigger size, irrespective of how the team is matured, there is some oversight is needed for the team to, be 100% customer focused, right? So that is why, to ensure that teams are aligning to the release train calendar cutoff for deployment, and like for deployment into release branch and then UAT, and like though we have a weekly release train, doesn't mean that the code gets injected in the same week. The window for that weekly release train is a 3-week window. So you are into the release branch, so your code that is going in this week, the prep is happening 3 weeks before, and that is all planned in the forecasting, that you will be in the release branch, you will be in the UAT, all the sign offs, regression testing and all happen. So there is a cutoff for each environment, and with the teams are meeting that cutoff, and all the, then we are documenting. There are around multiple, 30 plus repositories that we have, so that teams are documenting the repositories that they are touching. We are publishing the GraphQLs and all that are being updated, so that architects also look at those Confluence pages and ensure that what has been reported, then there are no overlaps, or the interdependencies that had been identified earlier, they are not being stepped on. So all these things are documented for every weekly release, but then architects and like other technical folks come and keep visiting these pages. Then teams are updating the content pages also, so ensure that the content that is going in, listing that, since so many teams are in play, that listing that all the content files that are being created that are need to be pushed into the higher environment also, because there have been scenarios where some teams, suppose if they forget to list the content file, you might see everything good in the lower environment, but at the time of prod deployment, the teams did not push one content file, so that page is a mess. So those things are also managed. Then I host go no go activities. Now we have multiple go no go activities, but some are internal, some are customer facing. So internal host go no go activity, where the test managers, the performance testing team, regression testing team all share their sign off with the business stakeholder, confirming that we are good for the release to go to the prod environment. And then there is one key activity that we have, that is host the final business and IT governance meeting. Because when you are going into prod, you need to give heads up to the prod support team also, to the L1 support team also, because when you are touching the site, so all those external to our team, but so all those IT governance stakeholders will also join support, and all the teams will have those who will have to support the code once it is released in prod. Now, once it is released in prod, it would not directly be supported by external team. There are certain warranty phases and all. But
Mm-hmm.
even during that overlap during the warranty phase, those external teams need to be aware that this is the new feature that has come in. And all the other handoff meetings for each of the work that is going, like you have to hand it off to application support team, the L1 support team, the regression testing team has to update. Like for 40, they are the regression team is testing the current functionality, whereas the new functionality is getting introduced. But then after that warranty phase, even the regression team has to update their automation suite so that they are covering this new functionality that is being introduced. So all these stakeholders have a governance, they come to the governance call and kind of give a final sign off before we can go to the pre-prod and before we go to the prod. And we have the commitment, the final readiness to various businesses in delivering what they committed for that week. And
Okay.
so we push code into our release branch, to the final branches and attend when we have the deployment meetings, attend all the final release meetings and publish the release updates. So these are the ones. And
Yeah.
other activities that I engage in is coaching one-on-one some of the
Mm-hmm.
non-performing, or I would say low performing Scrum teams. I do
Mm-hmm.
not coach the teams because due to the bandwidth, but I work with one-on-one with non-performing or low-performing team Scrum masters so
Mm-hmm.
that they in turn coach their teams. So
Mm-hmm.
if they are missing any point, okay, why is this happening? Like, no, are you having the retrospective with your team? What was the outcome of the retrospection? Was the action items identified there? Were they implemented? If
Mm-hmm.
they're implemented, why are we still seeing the issue? If there is a miss in the requirement, but like more coaching
Yeah.
one-on-one the Scrum masters and publishing various reports to the management and other internal or external administrative meetings need to be attended. So these
Good.
are the work
Yeah.
that
So
I.
perfect. So if I see, and I'm just like trying to summarize. So what I see is that work related to planning. So something which has to be planned in the upcoming PI. So the preparation for planning starts coming in. And then execution of the current planning. So current planning execution by way of daily impediment meeting, daily Scrum, or a weekly Scrum of Scrum, management reviews, and also implementation of the current plan. So execution. Continuous focus on release. So that's something also coming in. So planning, execution, release management, governance, and compliance somewhere which are coming there. So these are the probably and some post-release warranty support and knowledge transfer. So these are the
Correct.
5 things I'm picking at a top level. So plan, execute, govern, ensure the overall management reviews and release management, and then post-release management as well as production support, or arrangement for knowledge transfer. Rather than using the word production support, it's more like making things ready so that after release they can work. Yeah, it might involve some amount of support initially, but later on might be a knowledge transfer. Am I getting it
Correct.
right? Yeah.
Yes. And coaching.
Yeah, and coaching. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, that's thank you for adding that. And the continuous working with the Scrum Master, mentoring, coaching, so that they take care of their impediment problem solving related to that areas. And a lot of
Correct.
reporting. The governance involves a lot of reporting and that kind of stuff as well. Great.
Yes.
Yeah. And what is the multi-vendor environment here? Like all these 12 teams are coming from your organization, or there is a mix of other vendors? How the vendor setup works is there in your release train?
Yeah. So historically, I have been in teams where we had multi-vendor setup, but in this uh, particular engagement, there are no multi-vendors that are in play. But the other aspect that is in play here is the rebadged employees. So
Mm-hmm.
the employees from the client that have been rebadged and consumed by the vendor.
Mm-hmm.
So this
Mm-hmm.
is something new that I have seen. New in a sense, it must have been there for, but like no first time, like this comes with its own set of challenges where
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
someone, a resource who was part of that client team, now that client team becomes their own client. So
Yeah.
I would say
So
30 or 40% of those. So the mix is our vendor plus 30 or 40% of those that we have absorbed from client.
yeah, so it's like that the client has their own IT setup. They want to give this whole IT operation a good amount of work to the vendor. Vendor comes in and they consumes their current IT setup employees. They make them their employees, and then they start working for the same client. Yeah, so that's how
Correct.
that's what I'm understanding from rebadged employees, I guess. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
Mhm. But overall, I see a good collaborative and trusted relationship in your case, especially because even if your company is working as a service company, but they are technically working as an extended arm or a partner in the IT space for the client, because client is relying on your company significantly. Yeah, that's what I'm
Absolutely.
sensing.
Absolutely. Yes. This is more like a trust-based relationship
Mhm.
where it is collaborative and all the goals are jointly being met.
Yeah. The only thing I can suspect is even if it's a trust-based relationship, there must be some amount of contract and which might be producing some amount of compliance and administrative reporting work, because you must get paid somehow at the end of a month. So some timesheet or something might be needed to be produced, I guess. Yeah.
I agree. Like, when it comes to trust in a professional environment, as long as you are meeting the commitments, the trust stays. If you,
Mhm.
if you have strike one, strike two, the third times you strike, and then there is a issue.
Yeah. So what is the foundation of billing? Any idea, or like how they your company get billed? Like how do you get money?
Yeah, I do not have that idea.
They're not idea. Okay, yeah. Probably on timesheet or something else. Like, is there any based on the points you finish in the iteration, or is it meeting the PI objective, or looks like it has been done at a capacity level only? Yeah,
Yeah, it is at the capacity level only.
capacity level only. Yeah. So that makes it little easy and reduces some of the administrative effort. Good.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. So anything you want to explore further? Yeah. I think it was
Yes,
a nice
definitely.
introduction of a job. Yeah.
Thank you. So what I wanted to explore few things is I do like this role, but I am still trying to foresee that what is the career path for RT would look like more from a career progression.
So the way I see here is in the models keeps coming and going, but there are some leadership, execution, coordination roles. Yeah. And these roles keeps taking different names. So whatever you are doing in a past word, the project manager may end up doing the similar things. Yeah, more or less the
Mhm.
similar thing, but it may have a little different budgeting, different other challenges, because you need to meet and you have a kind of a temporary endeavor. That's the difference. Here you have a long lasting engagement, and some leadership style is little different. So most of these jobs like project manager, program management, release train engineer, or at some extent scrum master role as well, to me they are leadership roles. So they are development leadership roles. Now when I am performing development leadership role, what can I do beyond that? So I may do more challenging leadership roles. So it's like leadership is not necessarily telling role, it's a facilitating and leadership role. So any a large complex program where development leadership is needed, the getting things done is needed, you can target if you like doing the leadership role and coordination and management, and ensuring the alignment and execution. If I use a new word, better I say alignment and execution, because coordination looks like little old word. But yeah, overall alignment and execution job is a leadership job. So that's a one path. You may take more complex program as a target. You may work in a more challenging and rewarding environment where products are more critical, releases are happening more frequently, the more amount of automation is there, something overall in that particular direction. Yeah. So that's a one possibility. The another possibility is that getting into pure consulting space. So you also find people who are coming from delivery leadership background, they're getting into coach and consulting path. They start feeling a little tired doing this execution support all the time, and they want to focus more on strategic guidance, telling people how possibly they can solve their problem, and the other solves their own problem. You as a role stop solving problem. You more focus on strategization space, and so it's more about strategy and consulting, not execution. Yeah, because the leadership role, the delivery leadership role, is some amount of planning and execution, as you have been talking: planning, execution, communication management, stakeholder management, governance, billing. All these things are you are a delivery leadership role. But when you get into a strategic role, it's more on consulting, maybe guiding how to do a planning, not necessarily getting into execution. So that's another path which people take. That's coaching, transformation related path. Yeah. Now, in that path, there could be further two paths possible. So multiple streams are possible in the coaching space. One coaching space path is coaching the ongoing development. You are in a setup where things are settled, but you are sustaining and improving. That's a continuous improvement and sustenance coaching. There could be another one, which is a pure transformation coaching, where you are joining an organization where they want to do things differently. Say they want to go for safe, like a release train engineer and all, and they don't have any expertise related to running into a safe way of working. They need some consultant coach who will help, or they will need a team of consultants coach who will work with them to get safe started in their organization. So these are the possible paths I can see. And the product management is also a space if you feel that area is of your interest. So that's another possibility one can get into. Yeah.
Thank you. So, Saket sir, how does then this differ from from what you heard is from the pure agile coach role?
Yeah. So agile coach roles are last two, which I was talking about. So one can get into the sustenance and coaching space. Yeah. So if you see in many organizations, they also call their release train engineer agile coach. Yeah. In many organizations.
Correct.
Now, technically, it's a delivery coaching role. There are one type of organizations where they need a delivery leader also exhibiting coaching and sustenance. Which you are having some portion of it. You have a mentoring coaching relationship with your Scrum masters. If you expand that thing, and probably have some reduction in the execution role, where you are getting people on the same page and getting the issues identified and check the aging of the issues and highlight which one should be resolved, which one should be probably get postponed date. So that's an execution path. So if you get into a coaching space, you may not necessarily spend too much time there. You may focus more and more running community of practices for the Scrum Masters, where they come and share their knowledge. You improve their retrospective meetings by way of facilitating some retrospective and showing them how to do it better. You may conduct various improvement workshop with your teams, sometime on soft skills, sometime on tools. So your focus starts more on enablement part. Right now, as a delivery one, you have an enablement, you have an execution, and you need to play with both. And sometimes the execution takes the precedence because there are things to address to. Yeah. But in a coaching space, in an ideal coach role, they should have a less and less execution. They probably have zero execution. They have a more and more enablement part. So where I am saying that, okay, I will go and educate people on issue management rather than I manage issue. I will set up the environment where issues get highlighted fast and they get resolved. Or I will work on root cause analysis of the issues, or help the teams to facilitate a root cause analysis exercise on the issues so that these issues stops recurring. So that becomes my focus area rather than tracking what happened to that issue, who is working on it, where are we blocked, when are we going to close it. So that's an execution part. Though we are using the issue or impediment as a same element, but the focus becomes a little bit different. But if you aspire to get into coaching space, I think you have, again, your day already looks pretty full, but you can probably do some amount of readjustment to focus a little more on enablement piece. And that can give you a good exposure if you want to get into more profile where enablement is the priority thing.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Yeah. So, and another one that I had was in a service-based organization, as we were discussing earlier, the vendor has a contract with client. Yeah. Now, either it is T&M, time and material, or it's a fixed rate. But irrespective of the contract type, there is a certain commitment at leadership level to complete the work in a fixed duration. Now, in spirit of safe agile, we use t-shirt sizing when defining epics. So epics are defined at a portfolio level, for a very high level sizing, so that executives can do the road mapping, their business case investment analysis, valuation, priority ordering, negotiation, all those, right? But then later, when the rubber meets the road, kind of, and the team does the estimation in story points at user story level, how do we ensure that the story point estimations in user story all roll up and match the t-shirt sizing done initially for the epic? Now, ideal answer is that these are all estimates. So the
I
user
know.
story estimations need not add up and certain variations is accepted. But how do we manage that when contracts come in play? For example, for one of the epics, the t-shirt sizing might be marked as medium effort, but as we start doing the development, a few spike stories have to be created and the work balloons to extra large. So what is the best approach to justify this?
Yeah. So see, the problem here is the framework is not designed to solve this problem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
That is the challenge.
yeah, that's the challenge. And the framework is not designed to support this way of working, the way
Exactly.
we
Yeah.
are working. And that's why we need to find our own ways. Yeah.
Yes.
And that's why I was curious how the contracting is done, how the money is getting paid to your organization, because there comes all complication. So if it's a capacity based, say you have given 100 people to your, I'm just using as an example, bank. So bank has taken a service organization, 100 people. So they will get billed for 100 people, and bank has to ensure these people are doing the good job. If someone is not doing the good job, they probably can flag that and say that we need a replacement, or we are not going to pay for this particular thing. And it's a more like time and material or a capacity based billing. That's a pretty simple, that can go. But as some element of you can say ownership, commitment on epic level estimate starts coming in, yeah, even if it is not fixed one, but some variance and tracking
Correct.
starts coming in, then it will become a little tricky, because then bank may say, you guys quoted this, we approved the thing based on that money. Now that's your budget. Yeah. Now we
Correct.
want this particular thing that's running this much money. Then we have a situation at hand.
Correct.
I don't know. The basic thing is that continuous reflection. That's the only thing we can talk about. And actually, this problem exists in our traditional way of working also.
Yes.
Because when
Correct.
we pick up a new project, we have a rough order of magnitude estimate. And as we move forward, the estimate expands. And it is very difficult. Even if you use the traditional estimation technique, it's very difficult to estimate things at more than 20% accuracy in the beginning. Yeah, you need to take some time before you estimate at that particular thing. So what possible I can, again, it's again standard things, revisiting. I started my training career by giving training on estimation. That was the initial set of training I used to do. And a lot of service organizations were my client. I used to go for corporate training, and the first thing I try to convince them is that I am not going to teach you how to estimate accurately. Even after the training, you will not know how to estimate accurately. You can increase some accuracy, and you will know that exact accurate estimate is not possible. So you will revisit it multiple times. Yeah. So maybe we can start documenting those assumptions. Maybe we in the current safe way of doing, we might be doing this small, medium, large at a very high level, but we may need to get into some details, put some assumptions and the possibility of when the assumptions can go wrong, so that there is a foundation for the renegotiation of that particular size. And maybe you also start adding something called estimation confidence level, which tells that in a given particular epic, what are the tentative variances. So if as a client and vendor, we can have some agreement that, okay, we are doing an estimation at epic level, but each epic is not same. In some epics, you may need high variance. In some epics, you may not. In some epics, you may say that I will not be able to estimate till 2 months time. But so we have some factor to show it. So usually when we do our traditional estimation, we used to have a lot of space for assumptions. Yeah. but in a safe way of working, we don't consider them because we believe, oh, over a period of time, we all are together, we know what we are doing, they will get resolved. But I think if that's a suggestion I can give, recording assumptions and recording a confidence level, and maybe some checkpoints and on which you will check these assumptions and these confidence level, for each epic.
Thank you. Yeah, because as you said, right, not just for service based, but for in any model now, and that is the recurring theme that I hear from the team also, because service based is a high pressured environment. There are commitments to meet and all those, and then the team is like, this is not Scrum, and I and that is where I also wonder, how do we justify that as a Scrum in safe? Because ideally, Scrum is very idealistic and safe, but idealistic looks good or works well with a small setup in a small team. But when you extrapolate to where you are multiple teams that are in picture and you are going towards the organizational goal, you will have to have some checkpoints in place, and then the idealism kind of goes for a toss. So how, so as like, not just for this question, but how do we justify safe that it is really Scrum? For some reason, sometimes it feels like it is not Scrum.
Yeah. So see, what I see here is there are words and there are interpretation of the words in everybody's mind. Yeah. So say, for example, Scrum, then there are interpretation of Scrum in people's mind who hear the Scrum. Even if you remove safe context, there is a millions of interpretation of the way people do Scrum. And because there are like millions and billions variations of the organization, you have a particular setup, you have a type of application, you have a type of people. So it's a fairly defined framework, which is just saying, you focus on a time boxed way of working, you pick up something, you collaborate and show what you are doing. That's the basic structure.
Correct.
Now we do want to bring a lot of self-organizing into it. That's an aspiration. Now different organization, but the self-organizing thing is not, I would say, universally can be applied at all the teams. So there are different kind of background people coming in. You are working in a different cultural environment. You have a specific attrition rate in your company. Yeah. So the self-organizing cannot be seen, oh, you should be doing self-organizing when you have a 0% attrition. Yeah. You should be doing self-organizing when you have a 30% attrition. What should you do when you have a 60% attrition? Yeah. So the whole thing will start changing now. The framework will not tell you how to adapt as per the attrition. So there are situations at hand. So yes, the self-organizing is needed in any organization, any context, but we also need to see what is our environmental limits, what are our DNA limits for that particular thing. Now, how different possibly a Scrum way of working and when the Scrum comes inside the safe, the example I usually take is, so Scrum is like, in my training, I use this metaphor. Say you want to travel from point A to point B. Yeah. There are various ways of traveling. You can go on bike. Yeah. You can go on car. You can go on train. Yeah. So now when you are going on bike, you may not even have a road laid out. You can figure it out. You can take left turn, right turn, U-turn, wrong side, right side, whatever it is. Yeah. You can go on hill, you can go on trail, whatever you do, you can do. Probably you have more flexibility. Yeah. So that mode of transportation is very flexible. Yeah, relatively. But it has a limit. Only 2 people can sit on it. Now you go in a car. When you go in a car, you are still flexible, but you need to have at least roads and some amount of thing. You are not as flexible as bike. Yeah. You are on car. So car could be a Scrum. Yeah.
Yes.
A Scrum, because the bike could be that, you are 2 people are doing whatever they want. Yeah. Even without doing daily Scrum or without doing a sprint planning meeting. But when you are going in a car, you have 4 or 5 people together. You can't take left turn, right turn as you want. You probably go and take a U-turn. Yeah. So that's a possible thing. Yeah. Now that's a Scrum way of working. Then you have a safe way of working, which might be a train. Though they use a train as a metaphor, but I don't know what they want to interpret. So you have a train. Now train has its own way of going. Yeah. You can't expect train to behave like a bike. Yeah. Or a car. Now, again, we can't say bike is good, train is good, or car is good. It all depends upon the context. Yeah. Ultimately, there are places where you need a bike, there are places where you need a car, and there are places where you need a mass transportation system. Yeah. So
Correct.
usually the safe environment is a mass transportation thing. Mass, I think, again, it's a metaphorically. We should not just talk too much, but in general. And that's why we need to consider other people also. So as a Scrum team, I can decide what do I want to do. I might have an unpredictability in my estimation. I may change my path in the next sprint. But when I'm working in a multi-team environment, if I have too much unpredictability in my work, it impacts the other teams as well. So I need to have some amount of predictability in the system. That's how the SAFe operates. So they believe that even if with uncertainty, you need to bring sufficient amount of predictability in your PI plan. And in order to bring that predictability, they do all these things, continuous planning, continuous alignment and execution thing, putting your committed and uncommitted objective, giving some sort of buffers and all those stuff are primarily for bringing the predictability. So we can probably explain the context and may not get into the debate of this is A or this is B. We can say this is what it is. Yeah. So what we are doing is we are doing this way, and these are the contexts behind it. Because if you start talking is good Scrum or bad Scrum or this is Scrum or that Scrum, my personal experience is it becomes little debate and useless conversation as well. Yeah. What do you get by creating and plotting a nice Scrum picture? What we have, right? That's what we have. And now we work on it.
Yes. So where I was going with this, Saket sir, was that when teams start missing their sprint goals, now to their point, now we have estimated some velocity and all, but what Scrum says is you are self-managing. We might miss the goal, we will work it out. We have the challenges, and it is acceptable for teams to miss it, so we are self-organizing. So when you put a SAFe on top of it, or when you put a service based on top of it, and you start questioning that we cannot, you have missed it 3 times, it cannot happen, then it is no, we are Scrum, and we will grow, we will evolve, and they are right in their respect. I don't question that. But how do we match these two very different approaches and still have a happy path?
Yeah. So what I say that let's not talk about we are Scrum. Let's talk about we don't know what we are estimating. Yeah. So the whole idea here is rather than taking an escape of a word, we can say there is a situation. We went into a space. This is a space which is very much unknown. We don't know how other team members are operating. So there are various unknowns, and we need to work on that. So that is still a workable, because a label will be difficult to work. So we work. We definitely we need to find out why we have these deviations. So that's the first thing I probably want to focus in the conversation. The second thing I want to remind is that here we have two teams. It is not your agile team alone. We also need to consider the agile release train as a team. So when we need to focus on that train as a team, and that team also has made some commitment, and train is also need to figure out how they manage their stakeholder well. So we need to work on self-organizing space at the ART level as well, not only at a team level. So if and the ART as a self-organizing team want to ensure that how do we have a better predictability and working at a team level at an agile team space. So it is not like someone is pushing you to do, but there are two levels of team here. It is just the small team is a part of a big game. And that might be the difference, because the pure small way of working, I'm not using a word Scrum way of working, pure small way of working may not give a clear picture of how they integrate with the big. Yeah. So they are more focused on their small boundary, which is anyway not achieving the customer centricity goal, which is not anyway achieving the business alignment goal. So here you are in existence to achieve something. And there are two levels of grouping we have, or a teaming we have. And wherever we have a challenge, we need to resolve it. It is not about how could you do that and somebody is trying to prove because we are Scrum, we can do that. Let's not have that conversation. Find out, okay, how can we do things differently so that probably we have a better teaming and forecasting at a train level. Yeah, we are doing something at a team level. So say from individual, we started moving to a team. Now from a team, we want to move to a bigger team also.
Multi-team approach.
Yeah, multi-team environment. Earlier, the person was saying, I have done all the work, so don't tell me if things are failing. That was our traditional word. Then we say, okay, it's not only about you, it's about the team. Then it says, okay, my team has done all the work. Don't tell us if we are failing. Then says, oh no, it's not just about your team. It's an ART also. Yeah. So we need to take care of the overall system view. So that probably we can say. And sometimes it is also a way of how we manage the environment. People may bring these excuses when these things looked as if they have done some big blunder, and people start doing escalation and blaming the teams. So sometimes we also need to see how possibly we are reporting these things and analyzing these things. If these things are getting reported as a pinpointing and showcasing that these teams are bad team or something, then probably those teams also come up with their own arguments that we are not bad, this is how the system should be. And then it becomes a little bit more complicated. Yeah.
Correct. Thank you. Yeah, that was really helpful. So my other question is around SAFe itself is when we are, and this is something that when I was working in a non-SAFe environment versus in now, or I would say non-Scrum or non-Agile environment, is when it comes to architecture. Yeah. Now, for the implementation that we do here, it's pretty complex, and a lot of transformational activities are to be done. But what I struggle to balance is how can we say the architecture is also incremental, because architecture is kind of the skeleton on which it could be incremental, but still there is some sort of upfront pathway, or the architecture pathway should be built for you to start with it. Now, as we do the development and we say, okay, architect, now suppose if we look into that in Scrum, there are no roles for architects, developers and testers. Architects are considered as a stakeholder. So, and they will do, but if you have everything architected out, then it's not Scrum. Scrum needs to, but then when you have complex systems, how do you balance that, or how do you see that?
Perfect. So I like your last question, which is more about when you have a complex system, how possibly we can incrementally build the architecture. So let's not focus on this is Scrum or this is SAFe or this is what. This is the whole problem. We are thinking of.
Yes.
Now, why in the Agile way of working, we were discouraging building the whole the architectural view in the beginning itself. So the idea was that things are going to evolve. So we cannot have a perfect visualization of how the skeleton should look like, because our whole image is not clear. Once you have an image clear, your skeleton should be clear. That's the whole thing. And since image is going to evolve over a period of time, so that skeleton should also evolve over a period of time. That's the essential part of it. Now, each work environment may have a different amount of visibility about the skeleton and the image. There could be environment where image is pretty much visible. You know what you are going to do. There are only fine graining is something which has to be done at a later stage, but you have a fixed space. So if I just use a SAFe metaphor, if you click on solution document, they put it at a large solution level, but that can be used at a release train level also, where they talk about fixed intent and variable intent. So there will be some part in your requirement which is pretty much stable. You want to do like this. So usually when you have a multi-integrated environmental application, say you are banking, travel or something, you know that these are the type of data which has to come. These are the set of compliances which needs to be taken care. This is the set of user or a size of a security or a size of a scalability need to be supported. This a type of a deployment has to be taken care. So you have those things pretty much fixed. You have a pretty much fixed intent. You can't say I will work and then I will figure it out, should I meet this compliance or not meet that compliance. You don't meet the compliance, you don't do the business in that particular geography. You have to do it. So the more and more we have a fixed intent in our application, the more we need an architectural skeleton also ready for that fixed intent, because there is no use of not doing that, because you have a fixed intent. The amount of variability. So you can say, I have a requirement where there is a piece which is variable, there is a piece which is fixed. So for a fixed, I have a more proactive and stable architectural thing. The variable, I need to keep eye on it, and I need to evolve my fixed and variable relationship as I figure out more and more details about it. Yeah. So probably that is something I should do when I pick up a project or pick up a particular requirement, to identify the differentiation between two. I go with the reason why we wanted to do emerging architecture, because we have a variable intent. But many times in a fixed intent, you also want to have a estimation of running cost, infrastructure running cost, the deployment cost and all. And people want to put that as an overall life cycle budget. They don't want to approve something which will become so expensive to maintain. You want to use various Amazon high profile services, and those services produce so much cost for you, you can't sustain with that.
Correct.
So some amount of fixed and variable understanding, and we can ask this question to the people. And if there is more and more variability, we can also make them clear that it will go through multiple revamp of architecture, because we don't know what we are going through. So our ultimate architecture will evolve. We can't tell how are we going to deploy and how are we going to use it.
So even when you take up, Saket sir, like a agile transformation, where you are saying the organization is under complete, like, no, suppose you are in premise, you are going on cloud, you are changing the user interfaces, everything. Even there, is it okay that it's an emerging architecture? Because when a company invests, suppose millions or billions of dollars, the architecture aspect needs to be pretty thorough and solid.
Yeah.
So when we say emerging, like, not like that, incremental and all, for me, when I hear these words, I feel a sense of discomfort, rather than
uncertainty and discomfort.
Uncertainty. Because developers mess up, they can redo that, but architecture is like the skeleton that needs to be thorough.
So what I say is that in that context also, we need to identify some kind of a fixed concerns, say the scalability, security, cost, deployment, and that part of concerns should have an architectural answer to it. Yeah. So assuming that even if the requirements are emerging, but the compliance requirements are already pretty much clear. So there has to be an architectural approach which ensures compliance requirements. And then whatever part of the requirement is not clear, that part will emerge over a period of time, and that part of architecture will also emerge over a period of time. That's the incremental and emerging part. Yeah. So if I divide my whole requirement into fixed and variable, and for a fixed piece, I want to have a stable plan for architecturing and evaluating that particular thing. For variable, I should be able to update my architectural stuff. So let's not take it that everything is changing. When we are saying emerging architecture, emerging or incremental architecture, it doesn't mean everything is changing. And when we say fixed architecture, it doesn't mean that we make the architecture and everything initially and ask developer to fill that. That was our traditional approach. That approach is good if everything is fixed. When we have whole requirement is fixed, then these guys can keep filling it. But what happened in our previous approach is we fixed the architecture in advance. Then people started working, then a lot of change requests came. And because of those change requests, nobody bothered to fix the architecture. And then ultimately, many times what I have faced in my project, when we go for a deployment, we end up doing rework on architecture, because the initial architecture was assuming something, we did something, and then there was so much patchwork. And then when we faced a real deployment, we started realizing that this whole patch coming together are not sustaining now. So we need to rework on the architecture. So what we are trying to do here is that rework can get done continuously, and we don't do too proactive thinking because we don't know the requirement, but as much fixed requirement. But at the same time, when you have a clear compliance requirement, when you have a clear understanding of security, clear cost constraints, clear deployment recommendation, clear database recommendation, clear replication recommendation, disaster recovery, or those kind of a recommendation, you better create that. Yeah. Why to postpone that when you know that you have to do all this? Yeah. And because all these things will impact your overall development approach. So whatever intent is fixed, I think some amount of work should be done on that space. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
So another one that I had was for an RTE role, like based on your understanding, is how much technically inclined that person should be. Because I was seeing one of watching somewhere where they were listening, and it said, okay, tell us what is the CI/CD plan that if you go into a new organization, what is the CI/CD deployment plan you will have, or any other things. So how much, like, when it comes to a agile coach versus uh, release train engineer, is
Yeah.
it that one needs to be more technically aligned than the other?
Like it's I believe is the organizational approach who is hiring you. So there are people who focus in a different aspects depending upon the type of challenge they have. So if the organization has good team of architects, good development teams, they are not worried about technological incline of RTE. They are more worried about stakeholder management part. But if the organization is hiring an RTE and their technology part is also messy, they might look for some guy who can take care of some kind of a technological work also. So it has a function of who is hiring you. But at the same time, I did that Scrum Master job analysis. More or less, the pattern remains the same for a Scrum Master, project manager, RT, and all. The expectation would be that how do you promote build-in quality? How do you promote transparency in the system? And that is something is anyway needed from a Scrum Master as well as for release train engineer. I ensure that my teams are continuously taking the like shortening the feedback loop. So we have a principle which talks about incremental, and shorter the feedback loop tells us in knowing where do we stand. And if I don't have a proper integration happening on a frequent basis, I will not have a short feedback loop. We do talk about in SAFe that overall process of integrating and all transaction costs should be minimized so that you have a better automation space in place. So I believe rather than doing, if a release train engineer or Scrum Master need to focus on technological aspect, they need to focus on how do I ensure build-in quality in the system, what I have been doing to facilitate build-in quality in the system, and how can possibly we improve build-in quality. So that might come by continuous integration, that might come with something else. Now, I might not myself be able to do a build-in quality. No, that's another aspect where you are saying your team is unable to do it. Can you mentor them on building quality? So that might not be the case for all RTs. Some of them might be able to do it. But stressing on building quality, coaching on building quality, understanding what are the red flags of building qualities, and what are the possible good patterns of building quality, that much understanding, I think, should be good for a release train engineers, Scrum Masters kind of profiles.
Okay, thank you. So then that would cover like what is the test automation strategy you would recommend,
Yes.
and all. I think it all comes under the same.
Yes.
Like
yeah. So what is the integration strategies? What is an automation strategies? What is the deployment strategies? What are the good patterns of these three? What are the red flags of these three? So that kind of understanding, and how do you make your team preparing and doing that strategy? You know, so you how do you facilitate? Not necessarily you dictate. How do you facilitate what was working in your organization, what was not working in your organization? And why it was not working, what were the reasons you were unable to do these kind of automation. So those kind of view will help, I guess. Yeah.
Perfect. Yes, thank you so much. I think that covers some of the things that I wanted to discuss. Thanks a lot.
Good. It was nice interaction. You know, I end up learning a lot about release train engineer role as well. And I'm sure this thing will help our community to learn and probably ask more questions on it.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Nice talking. Yeah.
Nice talking.
Bye.
Bye.